Alright, we're back at Moment Machine, and we're going to talk about some camshaft stuff. We may get a little background noise with the fan from the computer, but we'll just have to live with it. So, anyway, the cams we're going to talk about are actually pretty much compatible with either the 2.8 V6 or many of the small blocks, and we talked about that before because the valve area per cubic inch is very similar. So in blue, what we have here is we have a cam doctor file of the stock, very much a stock camshaft. It's like most stock camshafts are in the mid 190s to low 200s at 50. And now what you are looking at here is this has the rocker ratio and the valve lash all factored in, so you're actually seeing valve movement here. If I was to bring up the lobes, which I can do here, this is the shape of the lobes down here in the lobe area, and you can see they have a lash ramp down here, so they're solid lifter designs, but this is just actual lifter movement. What you see up here is going through the rocker arm, and then you're backing out a little bit of lash. So what our goal here today is to do is just look at the cams and kind of understand the cycle and what some of it means. But we're also going to talk about, you're going to just generally see sort of the area differences in what some stock cams look like, some hot street, and then entry-level race. So if you go over to the left side of the screen, this is a compression stroke. Okay, it's TDC power stroke. And then you go to bottom dead center, back to top dead center, and so on, all the way to 720 degrees on the right, which is another compression slash power stroke, TDC firing. So it's just basically one cycle of events from plug firing to plug firing, and you're seeing the lobes are the events that happen in between the two plug firings. So in blue, you have stock, and it's very representative of stock cams for V8s, V6s, a lot of just stock push rod stuff. And then in black, you have kind of entry-level small camshaft. Okay, so what we have here is you'll see we have a left value up here. You see this, and then we have a right value. It follows these cursors. Excuse me. So you can kind of see, you hear the term lobe separation or lobe centers. So all this really does is, if you follow this, and we're going to the blue lobe, splitting the center of the lobe, the exhaust is very close to 112. And on the intake, very close. Yeah, very close to 112. So 111, 112 is where like a stock type cam would be. And then in our small aftermarket replacement camshaft, you're gonna see that the lobe centers are a little narrower, and what that means is that, this is going to be exaggerated, but as these two peaks come together, that's narrowing the lobe centers. So this is the center line of the lobe at the top. So the racier early street cam, you go from 112-ish to 110, and then 108. So this aftermarket camshaft, if you take the intake center line and the exhaust center line, you have 108 and 110. If you average those, you have a 109 lobe separation. So, like, the first thing you also want to know is over here on the left where the plug would fire and then you'd go down the power stroke. The exhaust valve, or the exhaust cycle, is the first one to happen. And so what you can see is from TDC, you can follow this cursor. You're probably going to notice that the exhaust valve starts to open before the piston actually gets all the way to the bottom. Okay, so that's something that's kind of important. We bring this over here, the green. That's actually, here's the top of the stroke on the left, and here's the bottom of the stroke on the right. So the exhaust valve actually starts to blow down the cylinder before the piston actually gets all the way to the bottom. And the reason you do that is because you want to get pressure and work pushing that piston, but there comes a point where the piston is dropping fast enough and the pressure is starting to get low enough that it's not really making any power anymore. So by opening the exhaust valve early, your main goal here is to get rid of any head pressure on the piston before it starts to come back up. Because once you get to bottom dead center, the piston is going to start to rise all the way to top center. And if there's any pressure on top of that piston, it's going to cost you power, pumping losses. So that's just some basic stuff. We're going to actually talk about some intake stuff here. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up some different lobes so you guys can kind of see the difference between stock, mild street, hot street, and kind of entry-level race. Okay, so what do we got here? Let's find them. Okay, there's another lobe. Let me make sure I get the right ones up here. Okay, and give me a second here. I'm trying to find the right stuff. So, where is it? Oh, I know. Hold on. Give me a second. I had all this laid out, but it was too late the other night, so I just got to bring it up. Okay, and then we'll put it on the right lobe center. Remember, rocker ratios can change from engine to engine, so we're keeping our rocker ratios the same. That way it's all apples for apples in the comparison. Okay, so in red what we have, so in black you have a mild street camshaft. So blue is obviously, these are stock lobes. Black is what we would call a mild, or like usually it would be one of the first cams you see on the page. Our fan's starting to kick on higher. Red, this is more what I would call a hotter street cam. It's these cams here like mid 220s to about 230 at 50. Okay, so stock's about 200 at 50. The black cams is about in the teens, 215 to say 218 at 50. The red cam is say in the mid 220s. This is representative stuff, guys, just so you're seeing the area. Okay, you're kind of seeing the lift and the area differences between stock, mild street, hotter street. And then down here, the white lobes, what I'm going to put up right now, these are, I'm going to see, maybe I'll change the color for you guys, so, I don't know. What are we going to do? Maybe we'll try purple. Yeah, that's probably better. Let's make them purple. Okay, so these two purple lobes are representative, especially in the V6 crowd, of a very popular cam that's ground by, I think, Delta Cam, and it's one that a lot of the 2800 guys talk about. Now, these are not those exact lobes, but I looked at the cam card for that grind, and I found the closest stuff that I had in the computer file. And this is very, very representative of those two grinds. I believe they call like a 505 lift and 252 at 50. And then the other one's like 245 at 50. Both of these lobes are just a couple degrees smaller than the particular Delta Cam that's in being talked about, but it's still very representative of the size of that cam. So what you also got to remember is they call out 505 intake lift on that cam, but because this is got valve lash in it, your lift is always going to drop with the valve lash. So but here you go. This is basically from totally stock to really probably too big for the street in purple, okay? And that's kind of what we're trying to take a look at. And the two things that make this cam, that make something too big for the street, is down here, and I'll zoom in on it. This is what's your overlap area. So you can see in blue, this is the stock cam, and this area inside this triangle, that's the time between exhaust closing and valve opening, when both valves are open at the same time, and that's called your overlap area. And as this area gets bigger, there's more time where both ports are exposed to each other, and at low engine speeds there's more time for dilution or things to go the wrong way. You know, exhaust can get back up in the intake tract, intake can get out in the exhaust tract. But this window is also a good thing too. At high speed, it helps use momentum from the exhaust to help initiate and start the intake tract or intake velocity happening. So this particular area can be your best friend and your worst enemy all at the same time. So it's really important that you get the right amount of overlap area for your needs, because if you have a really big overlap area like the purple, it's going to hurt the low speed drivability and help the high speed power. And if you were to try to go down here in blue and run this amount of overlap at high speed, it wouldn't have enough area to initiate velocity at high speed, and the engine would suffer the power, and the upper mid-range torque production would be bad. So, looking at the blue triangle, looking at the black triangle, red, purple, so on and so forth, you can see that these areas start to grow as the cams get bigger and the need for higher RPM come up. So we back out. The intake closing is one of the next real crucial things, and we're going to come over here and scan in on that. But one thing you're going to see is that the amount of closing, and I'm going to redraw this so we can see it, but after bottom dead center and bottom dead center, let me take this blue thing, we're gonna follow it. See me moving it here? That's bottom dead center. So as we get over here, the lobe shape over here is all effective as the piston's going down. This is all intake area that's used to establish velocity and port depression and the movement of air. as the piston's going down. But once you cross this blue line, the piston is stopped. The piston is now no longer moving. It's at bottom dead center. So you notice that your valves are all going to, even on the stock cam, they're going to be hung open quite a ways after the piston stops moving. And so one thing, and this is what I wanted to scan in on, was as we get down here past bottom dead center, you're now going to see the closings. So we can count 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Just the stock cam closes barely 50 degrees after bottom dead center. And there's kind of a general trend with engines that have this amount of valve area, is that somewhere around 10 degrees or so per 1,000 RPM is kind of what works. Or that's the amount of inertia you can create. So I'm going to go back. What you're going to figure out is to generate a certain, on the stock cam, when you open up this valve, it's going to be good at moving a certain amount of air through a port that's a fixed size. And when the port's a fixed size, that's going to dictate the amount of velocity you can generate. And when you generate, say, this much area and velocity, you can maintain your momentum out to, say, 50 degrees after bottom dead center before the valve closes. Okay, and the farther past bottom dead center you want to try to project momentum in the intake port and the cylinder, the more initial speed you have to generate. So it takes more lift, area, and flow to be able to project momentum and velocity farther and farther past bottom dead center. So that's kind of one of the big things that you see when you talk about dynamic compression. Why does a big cam, say, not run very good at low speeds? Well, it's because the farther the intake closes after bottom dead center, the one thing that's happening is that in all of this area we're looking at, the piston is rising. And you're after bottom dead center, and you're headed toward top dead center. So the mechanical function of the piston rising is making the cylinder smaller, and it's going to push the air back out. So, you know, if you don't have enough inertia and velocity in the intake tract to maintain a strong fill before you get to that equalization point, right? So you have inertia and momentum headed into the port and the cylinder, but you have a piston rising trying to push it back out. And that means that the air column and the velocity has to be stronger than the piston rising to keep filling the cylinder. So one of the key reasons that big cams don't work at low speeds is the intake valve closing out here is way too late. You don't have enough inertia and velocity in the port at low speeds to maintain fill this far past bottom dead center, and so the piston just shoves all your air and fuel right back up into the manifold, and that's a form of reversion in itself. So as you can see, the bigger the cam gets, the farther past bottom dead center it closes, therefore it requires more inertia and velocity in the port to maintain fill. And it's the main reason that if you close the intake valve really late when the engine's moving slow, it will lose its bottom end because the piston just is shoving the air right back up into the port. So that's kind of a look at some timings. And the exhaust valve is very similar. The exhaust valve behaves a little different because the contents are under pressure when the exhaust valve opens, but you still do have a time frame from your opening to bottom dead center when you want to try to get the pressure blown down so that you don't have residual head pressure that's going to keep the piston from rising. So anyway, I thought I would just kind of take a little bit of time and give you guys a little bit of an explanation on stock cams. You know, you can basically see the about size and area of a stock cam in blue, mild street cam in black. I consider the red Lobe to be, it's not the biggest thing you can run on the street, but it's probably the biggest thing you would run on the street if you still wanted to drive the car quite a bit and have some pretty decent street manners. The purple would be very limited driving use, really more probably for the track. And you know, and you can kind of start to see why now. It's because all of your opening and closing events are extended kind of outside what I would call the useful street envelope, and that's, you know, meant to give it a very strong upper mid-range emphasis, more like you'd require on a road racetrack. But also just the general area differences too. And one thing I'm going to talk about here, and this is important, is that all rules are meant to be broken. But when we, like, if we come back over and we look at these closing numbers here, you can get away with closing numbers that are later than what they really need to be if you have a strong form of inertia tuning in your induction. Like let's say you had an individual runner induction with a long tuned length. If you have that, then sometimes you can make a longer intake valve closing a little more docile, and you can use it to your effect. You know, you can make that Lobe more tractable and drivable while still, you know, having the strong upper mid. But if you just have regular type manifolds, plenum manifolds, or manifolds without very proper shaped runners, some people will try to put a lot of Lobe in them to crutch them, trying to get more airflow to go in the engine. But, you know, a lot of what happens on the front side of the bottom dead center over here is filling, but it's also signal generation. And you have to get enough mass and momentum generated in this region of the cam to keep filling this, oh boy, to keep filling this cylinder long past bottom dead center. Okay, and that's something that you always want to look at your intake manifold and your header design really close if you're going to start trying to overgam something. Because if you just have untuned shorty headers, or you know, some kind of very generic intake manifold, and you start trying to put a bunch of cam in it, it's going to act bad. So at that point, you're better off to try to improve the induction if you can in a flow state, and then shorten up some of your timing numbers a little bit. So anyway, I know this was long, boring, and nerdy. I hope the computer didn't bother you guys too much. I just can't do anything about it. It's too warm here, and I'd have to wait for a month or something to reshoot this. But for John, Jeff, Marmot Y Block, MMAD, go to the website, check out our other stuff on YouTube. Have a good one.